On this episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence, when CBS greenlit the Planet of the Apes television series, the rush was on to create scripts. The year was 1973. The CBS television network made an exclusive deal with 20th Century Fox to air their Planet of the Apes films. Based on the ratings of those films, the Fox studio pitched an idea for a television series, an idea that had been floating around for several years. The network was chomping at the bit for more apes, so they okayed the Planet of the Apes series, ordering 14 episodes to start. Then, somebody realized that they already had ordered a futuristic sci-fi drama series. Oops. Gene Roddenberry's Genesis 2 project had a similar present-day man in a futuristic world storyline. Now, Roddenberry already had 20 scripts written, and he was just about to start up production when his new project was suddenly nixed by the network. Thus, it was on the 20th Century Fox production team to hurry and prepare enough scripts to start filming their new show. Coming up, I'll be going over the original TV series concept. Then, I'll look at Rod Serling's original scripts for his ideas for the first 2 episodes. I may throw in some video clips here and there where the story ideas overlap. It's standard procedure for a television series to create a concept Bible for writers to reference when submitting their scripts. The concept Bible for the Planet of the Apes series was most likely written by series creator Anthony Wilson sometime between 1971 and early 1973. It's only 9 pages long, 10 if you count the cover page. In it, astronauts Alan Verdon and Stan Kovac encounter turbulence while traveling through Orion's belt. Now, as cool as Orion is as a winter constellation, I'm aware that the stars in its belt are widely varying in distance, ranging from nearly 700 to more than 1,300 light-years away. That's a very large range of turbulence, if you ask me. Their ship is damaged, they're lost, etc., 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 but an emergency homing device can bring them back to Earth. An Earth 2,000 years in the future. An Earth that has now somehow become a Planet of the Apes. Let's talk about the lead characters. Astronaut Alan Verdon is a sensitive, responsible, level-headed human being. He's from Texas, leaving a wife and a child waiting for him back home. Now, why would any space program send a married man on a very long interstellar space mission from which he may not return? Makes no sense to me. He'll meet women along the way, but the memory of his family and his hopeless idea of somehow getting back to them blocks any serious relationship possibilities. Fellow astronaut Stan Kovac is single, and we later learn in at least one of the episodes that he's from New Jersey. He's a man living in the moment, no strings attached. He's a realist who holds no hope of ever returning to his former life on Earth. Now, I'm aware that some of you are probably saying, who? Stan Kovac was the original name of astronaut Pete Burke. Now, I don't know why the name was changed, but the first 6 or 7 scripts were written with the name Kovac, and sometimes it was just crossed out and Burke written in by hand at the last minute. Anyway, they decided to make the name change before filming started. At least I think they did. I never noticed any voice dubbing to correct it. The third lead in the concept Bible is a talking chimpanzee named Galen. He's courageous, but he still holds on to some of the taboos of his backward ape culture. Then again, he's open-minded and willing to learn from his human companions. They're more or less thrown together as fellow fugitives, and they become close friends. Before I continue with the rest of the characters laid out in the Concept Bible, let's touch on the casting of those 3 lead roles. The producers had just started looking into casting the part of the chimpanzee Galen when, oddly, they were approached by Roddy McDowall's agent, showing that he had an interest in the role. As a known star, he would earn top billing. All of the other apes had already been cast before they got around to finding their lead humans, Alan Verdon and Stan Kovac. The role of Alan Verdon was first offered to actor James Franciscus, who was fresh off 15 episodes of the ABC medical drama Doc Elliott. He turned it down. Mark Singer tested for the role, paired with Barry Jenner as Kovac. Singer wasn't chosen to play Verdon, but he was cast as Dalton in The Gladiators. Jenner joined the cast of a fledgling soap opera named Somerset. Olympian Bruce Jenner, no relation, also tested for the role of Verdon. In fact, more than 50 actors tested for the 2 lead roles. Fox had offered the role of Kovac to James Naughton a total of 3 times. He wasn't particularly wild about playing the role, but he was married, and he had 2 kids. He also needed to pay his 2 weeks overdue rent, so he took the part. It was late May 1974, with the series premiere date of September 13th looming in the future, and they still hadn't found their Verdon. Ron Harper was in New York getting ready for his upcoming wedding to soap opera actress Sally Stark. Fox flew him out to California on a Thursday so he could test for the part, and then he went back to New York on a Friday evening to be married on Sunday. Fox was sure they had their Verdon, but the network wasn't convinced. They wanted to see more test footage, so the producers had to track the man down while he was on his honeymoon in Ireland. Ron reluctantly agreed to come back to Hollywood, but only if Fox agreed to bring Sally along and have a car waiting for them and put them up in a suite at the Hilton. When Ron was informed that the part was his, he left his bride in New York where she was filming soaps, and he bugged out to Hollywood to be a star. Oh, and he was told his hair needed to be lighter. Getting back to the Concept Bible, we have our apes. The orangutans are the ruling class, government officials, judges, ministers, administrators. Actors playing the orangutans generally had to be of medium height, about 5 foot 8 inches to around 5'10". In metric measurements, that's about 173 to 178 centimeters tall. Gorillas are enforcers, police, actually the concept says policemen, soldiers, hunters, guards. They're the heavies of society, and they should be tall, around 5'11 to 6'2", or about 180 to 188 centimeters. Chimpanzees are the intellectuals of the ape society. They're the doctors, teachers, and scientists, but their inquisitive minds can attract suspicion. Chimpanzees are smaller, typically shorter than 5'8", or 172 centimeters. The council includes 2 members of each species, with an orangutan, Zaius, acting as their presiding officer. Zaius wants to extract any knowledge the astronauts might possess before they are destroyed. He wants them brought in alive. Ursus is a menacing gorilla who heads up the military and the police forces of this ape society. His name was later changed to Urko. He's dedicated to hunting down the astronauts and destroying them before they can use their superior intellect to bring forth a rebellion. Which leaves the humans of this future ape world. They are defined by the zone where they exist. In the center of the ape world is a metropolis of sorts where humans hold menial jobs as clerks, servants, laborers, and slaves. There might be an occasional overseer. Outside of the central city, peasants live in a rural agrarian lifestyle. They may be pressed into whatever service their ape masters might decide. There's also a forbidden zone, where pockets of renegades have gathered to develop a civilization of their own beyond the totalitarian rule of the apes. Unlike the Planet of the Apes films, these humans can all talk, and they're every bit as intelligent as their ape counterparts, who rule only by their superior strength, weapons, and sheer numbers. The apes, out of fear and ignorance, have many taboos and superstitions. Transportation is by horse. Authors were advised that stories should be strong, personal, and emotional, with emphasis on depicting the fascination of the astronauts seeing the human-like apes. Danger and tension should be present, but the stories should be about people. The idea was not to always pit man against ape, but to battle fear, prejudice, and hatred. Unfortunately, many of the scripts ended up being cookie-cutter stories about one or another of the fugitives being captured, with the other two stuck trying to help him escape. There were jokes that they'd often flip coins just to see who was going to be caught in what episode. Rod Serling was tasked with writing the first 2 episode treatments. A revised episode 1 script begins with a voiceover of Verdun before entering suspended animation. This is similar to what happened in the original film. Kovac also adds a voiceover of his expositional thoughts. Alarm bells, automated voices, and flashing lights begin. Then the astronauts are revived as their spaceship approaches a planet. We dissolve to the 2 astronauts exploring with their helmets off. The air is breathable. Kovac, the wisecracker of the 2, says that it's a great place to visit, but he wouldn't want to live there. Verdun adds, but you could live here. They're looking for water. They find pieces of Taylor's spaceship washed up on shore. Remember, Rod Serling had written the screenplay for the very first Planet of the Apes film. I guess this was his way of trying to tie those 2 productions together. Kovac theorizes that they've gone through a time warp, and they're back on Earth in a far-off future, or maybe long in the past. Verdun isn't hearing any of it. They explore a bit, and Verdun discovers a wooden cross with an astronaut's helmet hung on it. It's Taylor's. In a morbid scene, they exhume the skeletal remains and find a bullet in its rib cage. There's another one, shot as well, and then a third with a broken neck. The 4th is a female ape. And that ends a dark first act. I'm a bit confused at this point for several reasons. They mention Taylor several times. Taylor as in Bright Eyes, I guess? And if it was that Taylor, who would have buried him with such a cross marker? It's also mentioned, before they determine that the female remains are of an ape, they say that there were no women aboard Taylor's ship. But what about Stewart? Didn't they watch the first film? These 2 guys wouldn't have known that she had died in the suspended animation chamber. We open Act 2 with the astronauts coming upon an ape, which Kovac shoots in the neck. Just because. Serling makes no differentiation of the ape species anywhere. They're all just apes. They carry the ape off. Back at their spaceship, Kovac removes the bullet and he bandages the wound. He jokes about it. The ape starts to come to, so they sedate it. The ape tries to make a sound, but it can't. It's kind of like Taylor in reverse. They look out a porthole and notice some movement. They determine that they're being watched. Now's a fine time for Verdun to wonder who buried the bodies. Then they remember another detail. There were only 3 human remains, but their craft held a crew of 4 men. Again, forgetting about Stewart. They decide to sleep in shifts. In the morning, they start unloading equipment to lighten the load for liftoff. Verdon wants to find that 4th crew member. Were they supposed to be on a rescue mission, I wonder? They move the ape outside, and Kovac jokes about how the ape will be roaring and grunting again as soon as his vocal cords heal. After the men move off, that ape dabs at his wound, and he uses some of the blood on his fingers to write, "I can speak," on the side of their ship before he collapses on the ground. A sudden rainstorm washes those words away. Act 3 opens the next morning with Kovac wanting to get off the ground, but Verdon is determined to find that 4th crew member. They go exploring again, and when they return, they find that their ship has been broken into. The hatch has been open, and everything inside has been smashed. Verdon is furious. He runs out with his gun ready, and he sees that bandaged ape. He takes aim. Verdon is convinced that this ape has done the damage, especially when he notices a length of pipe in the ape's hand. The ape drops the pipe, and he speaks. He introduces himself as Galen, and he says that he tried to prevent the damage to their ship. Well, as you can imagine, the astronauts are in shock. A talking ape? Verdon gathers his wits and asks, who went into the ship? Galen explains that it was the security police. He tried to hold them off, but they were too strong, and he ran away. Dr. Kovac introduces himself and Colonel Verdon. Of course, one of them would want to be a doctor if it's a rescue mission. They think that Galen is a one-of-a-kind talking ape, but Galen explains that everything there is run by talking apes. He contrasts their ape evolution with that of planet Earth, which leads us to believe that they're not back on Earth. Galen is familiar with the previous spacecraft and its crew of 4 men. He takes them on a quest to obtain repair parts. They head to Central City, and this is where we get some exposition, but the story doesn't quite jibe with the original film. Verdon and the doc look identical to the local humans, but the astronauts are far more intelligent than the locals. Galen is on their level of intelligence, however. Humans are hunted for sport in this world. That happened to the previous astronauts. Verdon mentions the female ape remains. Her name was Zira. She was helping them to escape. So is this an alternate timeline from the movies? Who knows? Galen recommends that they forget about the human. He's dead. Galen wonders why they share the same language. Some of the same customs, too. They'll need to wait until dark to enter the city. And as they do, Ursus and his secret police are waiting to capture them. In Act 4, the council members argue over the fates of these human newcomers to their planet. Zaius wants to study the new humans to further the apes' knowledge. Ursus wants the astronauts destroyed, of course. Otherwise, they will contaminate the local human population. The meeting is adjourned so that Zaius and Ursus can discuss the matter in private. They both agree to let the humans go if they will leave the planet immediately. Zaius calls them to his chamber where he shows them an ancient newspaper. It's a 1990s copy of the New York Times with the headline proclaiming, "Three-way nuclear war begins." So they're back on Earth, as we've suspected all along. I don't know why they tried to trick us, since we'd all seen the movie anyway. Zaius tells them about his agreement with Ursus, that they will be released to take off into the sky, and they can go back home. They get back to their ship, only to find it's been blown to bits. Uniformed apes start firing at them from all sides. Missing, of course. No, I take that back. Zaius is hit, and he goes down. He commands Galen to take the astronauts to safety in the forest. They're chased by 2 mounted apes. Verdon throws a rock. It hits one of the apes in the face, and he falls, and then the second rider's horse stumbles over him. The 3 fugitives climb aboard the horses and gallop away. Meanwhile, Zaius gets up. His wound is superficial. Ursus gloats in his victory. He will track the humans down and eliminate them. And this is where I would have put the final scene. You know the one. The 3 fugitives are making their way to their next adventure on the planet of the apes. But we continue. It's night. The fugitives are trudging through heavy brush when they suddenly break through into a clearing. Humans, dressed much like medieval peasants, stand surrounding a bonfire. They're nonplussed by Verdon and Kovac, but they shrink away from Galen as he approaches. The strangers seek food, shelter, and protection. The group grumbles at their request. They would rather not attract the fury of the apes to their group. Kovac explains that man didn't always live like this. An old man among them understands, and he leads them off. In a nearby cave is a rusting old automobile. The old man tells them of their legend. Centuries ago, men built such things as this. People sat in them, and the things moved. As Verdon admires the condition of a 2 centuries old car, the old man tells them that they will leave in the morning. Meanwhile, Dr. Zaius is standing before a judge who proclaims that the orangutan is to be released as long as he doesn't interfere with the police in the matter of the humans. Zaius refuses to make any guarantee, so he's placed in custody, but not before he warns them about allowing a return of man to power. There's a dissolve to the 3 fugitives, 2 men and an ape, helping each other climb a mountain. They're on their way toward a series of adventures on the planet of the apes. Now, when I started reviewing the series, I was under the impression that Art Wallace had merely tweaked Serling's scripts to come up with Escape from Tomorrow. In reality, very little of Serling's first episode script remains in the filmed first episode. We have the crash landing, that's inevitable. Then the astronauts find out they're back on Earth by reading an old newspaper. They need that to explain where they are. And the apes blow up their ship, but under slightly different circumstances. Rod Serling's Zaius is much more of a pacifist than the one we see in the series. Let's go on and compare episode 2. Guerrilla soldiers line up to be issued rifles, including one very young ape who happens to be the son of Security Police Commander Ursus. It seems that Zaius is no longer in custody. He criticizes Ursus for planning to hunt down the fugitives, whose only crime seems to be that they exist. Ursus tells Zaius not to think of it as an execution, but rather as a safari. Zaius prays that all the troops return safely, albeit empty-handed. Again, he's a little more of a pacifist than in the actual episodes. Meanwhile, the fugitives head toward a river. Galen says that it's about 10 kilometers. Since Taylor was to have landed in New York State, does that mean the U.S. had adopted the metric system in their world? The river leads to the Forbidden Zone, so called for its deadly species of ape killers. Galen and Kovac discuss why the ape is exiled. He'd befriended humans before he met these 2, apparently. Interesting. A human sympathizer. Verdon dreams of finding Chicago over the next mountain. Kovac scoffs at him. He says that the only thing over that mountain is another mountain. Then another, and another, from sea to shining sea. Not to mention apes, who would love nothing more than to mount them on their walls as hunting trophies. A staccato of bullets strikes, sending the three fugitives running, with Ursus and his band of hunters in heavy pursuit. His son takes the point position, where he's hit in the head when Verdun throws a rock. Then the apes come under attack by a barrage of arrows shot by unknown forces. Ursus calls for his hunters to fall back, knowing that his son is still out there, possibly dying. They take cover behind a group of trees. They'll hold there until nightfall. Meanwhile, the fugitives are wondering where those arrows had come from. They locate a secure area for a campsite. Galen remarks that the spot he chose will allow them to hear anyone who attempts to approach, and that's the cue for the sound of falling rocks. Verdun crawls to the edge of the cliff and he looks down, where he sees the ape that he'd hit with the rock. Galen recognizes that bleeding and barely conscious ape, trying to climb up to them. It's Zonda, the teenage son of Ursus. Verdun picks up another rock, about to finish the job, when Galen stops him. Zonda collapses. The men climb down to check on the prostrate ape. Dr. Kovac is conflicted at this point. His self-preservation wants to put the ape out of its misery and ensure their safety, but the doctor in him is telling him to tend to the wound. At Galen's urging, they lug the young ape up the hill to their camp. Later on, the humans are away, looking for whoever had shot the arrows, and Zonda starts to regain consciousness. The young ape wants to be taken back to his father. He promises to request leniency on behalf of Galen. That would mean no execution for Galen. The most he could get would be life in prison. Galen's going to take his chances with the astronauts. Meanwhile, Verdun and Kovac find an ancient lamppost and a stairway. It leads down a hole in the ground to an old subway station. That sounds vaguely familiar, except this time it's a BMT in New York instead of San Francisco's BART system. In Act 2, the astronauts proceed halfway down the stairs to find a light still operating after 2 centuries. They hear the hum of a generator. Yeah, I'm not buying it. Kovac, the wisecracker, says, "You know what happens next? A subway train comes by. We get on. It takes us to Brighton Beach. We'll eat Nathan's hot dogs, pick up a couple of broads, and then we'll run over to the garden for a hockey game, or maybe a handsome ride in Central Park." Verdun grabs Kovac and tells him to take it easy. But Kovac breaks away and he runs the rest of the way down the platform, yelling out, "Calling on all 20th century ghosts to come out." More lights flicker on. The two follow the platform to a stationary subway train. They stop dead in their tracks when they see a man looking at them from inside that train. Even more lights come on. Now they see people lined up along the walls, some of them armed with bows and arrows. They're all staring at the astronauts, inquisitive looks on their faces. The subway train's door opens, inviting Verdun and Kovac to enter. The man they saw through the window is seated, waiting there for them. The rest of the people move to surround the train. The astronauts thank the man for intervening to stop the apes. The man just stares at them. Kovac says that he didn't expect electricity, adding that he'd heard the generator running. The man continues to stare at them. Verdun eventually shouts, "You do speak, don't you?" The man looks around, bemused, before answering with some fluency. He adds that he also reads, and that they have electricity and a gasoline-powered generator. The man finds it intriguing that these two men run from the apes as well as with an ape. It's a long story, says Verdon. He starts to explain, but the man cuts him off, asking their names. Then he asks if they'd captured the ape that they were seen with. When told that Galen is a friend, the man responds that apes can be one of two things: an enemy, or maybe a pet, not a friend. He then brings up another rather odd behavior. Verdon had hit the one ape with a rock, yet later, Kovac administered to the ape's wounds. Space travel must have affected their thought processes, he surmises. Oh yeah, they had told him they came from space earlier. He describes their group, armed with primitive bows and arrows, against an army force of many times their numbers. But the humans have books and knowledge in their underground city. They had located the generator, covered as it was in a preservative. They'd learned how to use it. He says that they'd also unearthed a library. At this point, a man enters and reports that the two apes had been located and captured. They're both alive. Verdon and Kovac are free to go now. As they're leaving, Galen and Zonda are being carried down the stairs. After interrogations, they'll be exterminated. Verdon asks the man what differentiates the humans from apes. He says that he's met both and he still hasn't found a civilization. The man wants to know what they might do to prove that they're civilized, and Verdon suggests putting the apes on trial. Put animals on trial? That's unheard of. It's Act 3. The man in charge had been listed as simply Man in Act 2. Either we have a new character as the judge, or Man suddenly has a new name: Dempsey. I haven't seen that done before in a screenplay. They usually keep it consistent throughout. A makeshift courtroom is set up in the library. Dempsey will be the judge. There's a jury, a book he refers to as a prisoner's docket, and a library book on the King's Law. The prosecutor is a man named Fallon. He announces the charge: murder. He submits the charges. They're broad, general accusations based on the defendants being apes. Verdon, acting as the defense attorney, counters that Galen had taken no part in any such crimes against humanity. Also, Zonda is under the age of maturity and therefore not responsible. When questioned, Zonda doesn't say anything to help himself. He was on an expedition to hunt humans. He had a rifle. He used it. And his only regret was not killing a human with it. The prosecution rests. Verdon's defense strategy is to claim that Zonda was ordered to hunt the humans. Dempsey consults a book. At the Nuremberg trials, it was determined that following orders was not a valid defense. He makes comparisons between the two species, why one is wild and the other is civilized. The argument seems to break down, and Verdon ends up arguing with people in the audience, until Dempsey calls for final arguments. The prosecutor continues to condemn the prisoners because of their species, assuming they might kill. Galen asks to speak. He says that they're on trial for murder, but neither of them has killed. Instead, he claims that they're really on trial for being apes, and for that they have no defense. He then asks them to kill him, but to let the young Zonda go free. He asks them to show compassion. Then Kovac references the disintegrating books. He starts quoting Shakespeare on mercy, and Galen finishes the passage. I wonder if either of them have read the original Klingon. The jury retires to deliberate. Later that day, Ursus has brought up troop reinforcements. He's about to signal the attack when Zonda appears, walking slowly toward them. Ursus thinks it's a trap, but Zonda convinces him to go home with no more killing. Zonda turns and waves to the humans. That's just a little too saccharine to be believable. Now, I'm fairly certain that if he'd been indoctrinated to hate humans for 15 years of his life, I don't think this one trial is going to turn him around like that. He may be more open to discussion than before, but nowhere near having immediate acceptance and waving bye. The fugitives say their goodbyes to Dempsey, and they go on their way toward their next adventure on the Planet of the Apes. I went into this thinking that these first two scripts were a two-part story that was trimmed to one to create Escape from Tomorrow. That wasn't the case at all. So now I have to give Art Wallace much more credit than I'd have thought he deserved for his original script. As I was preparing my notes, something struck me. I wondered if they'd decided against producing that second story because of Roddenberry's Genesis 2. Remember, his series was based on a subway station-based culture that had retained past books and knowledge. There were more unfilmed scripts written, a few of which are available. One script is called Hostage. It was an early story that was written long before the parts were cast. Maybe I'll figure out why it was passed over when I examine that script on my next outing. Until then, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment. Then, tune in when I post my next Old Joe's Reminiscence.